On the go? So are we. Get the IBJ Media app, your all-in-one news source for Indiana business news. Get breaking news alerts, read every story from IBJ, Inside Indiana Business, and the Indiana Lawyer, and listen to your favorite podcasts all in one place. Big news, small screen. Search IBJ Media and download the app today.
This is the IBJ Podcast for the week of May 4th, 2026, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. This week's edition of the Indianapolis Business Journal is our 12th annual innovation issue, in which we typically take a deep dive into a new technology or feature intriguing startups in central Indiana. This year's issue is devoted to looking back at the previous dozen years and seeing whether these fledgling innovations, potential disruptors, and promising companies have panned out like some thought they would. Now, virtually every large or medium-sized company today says it's dedicated to innovation, especially in light of the generational disruption in business created by artificial intelligence. But innovative is a broad and squishy term. One company's so-called cutting-edge development might look to another like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Elliott Parker of Indianapolis-based startup builder Elliott Partners has seen many examples of what he calls the illusion of innovation, meaning corporate attempts at change that are either mostly for show or that don't go nearly far enough to make a real impact. Indeed, Parker says large companies often are unable to innovate their business models because they're designed and incentivized to keep doing the thing they're successful at doing. For the owners, executives, and managers who are truly interested in making big bets on innovation and challenging dogma within their businesses, what will work? Parker is our guest this week to talk about his book titled The Illusion of Innovation and how companies can evade the traps. He also discusses how the recent explosion in AI is altering the innovation ecosystem and how companies are built and run. Parker says he's optimistic, though, quote, things are going to get very, very weird very quickly, end quote. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Elliott Parker, CEO of Indianapolis-based Elliott Partners, and the author of the book, The Illusion of Innovation. Thanks so much for coming down to the studio.
Great to be here.
So let's quickly do the dinner party introductions.
Sure.
So we're at a dinner party. We don't know each other. For some reason, they got us sitting next to each other. So I say, hey, I'm Mason. I work for a business newspaper. I edit stories. I write stories. I write newsletters. And I have a weekly podcast. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how fun of a party it is if we're all talking about what we do for work, but
This is the only kind that I go to.
I do love what I do for work. I run a company called Elliott Partners. We build startups with corporations. So we're a venture builder. We come up with ideas and we turn those into companies. We recruit entrepreneurs to run those companies and we help those companies scale. And core to our thesis is that if we can do this with corporations in the loop who are incentivized to see those startups succeed, we can build better companies. And those corporations can access innovation that would otherwise be hard for them to do internally.
Okay, so I own a corporation.
Yeah.
And I feel the need to create something independent of my core business.
Yeah.
I could approach you and say, what can we do here?
Yeah. That's often what happens. Corporations might have an idea for a spin out. They'll come to us. We can help them with that. They might have a business problem that they experience or a problem that their customers experience that might be hard for them to solve internally. Or sometimes they'll just come to us and say, we are nervous about this looming challenge on the horizon, not sure what to think about it. Can you help us figure it out? Or we see an opportunity on the horizon. We're not sure what to think about it. We know we need to experiment and go try some things. Perhaps building a startup or a handful of startups could be a good way to go learn about that opportunity space.
Okay. How old is Alloy?
We've been around for 6 years. We formed spun out of the venture studio in Indianapolis, High Alpha, back in 2020.
How many startups have you created so far?
Portfolio is up to 43 companies.
It's like at least 10 a year.
It's a lot.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. We launch about 10 or 12 companies a year. We've got about 20 people full time around the country and a network of great service providers and advisors and fractional helpers that lean in and help us do all the work that we do.
Okay. Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah.
In the spirit of experimentation, I have something I want to try out. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. It's a scenario. You can weigh in on a scenario. So again, let's say I am the CEO of a 500-person company, and this company makes cookware. What it makes isn't really that
great,
but we make cookware. We make really good cookware. But I am concerned about competition from several new players in our market segment. So I call a big town meeting at company headquarters. Everybody's there. And I say, hey, we're the best at what we do, but we need to evolve. So we are going to create an innovation team with some of the current department heads and a consultant we're bringing in from the outside. I want everybody here to take the next 20 minutes to think about a way we can be innovative and really think outside the box. How can we be better? And our innovation team will take those ideas and we'll have some of our own, and together we will chart the next great chapter in our company's history.
Yeah.
That's the scenario. Does that sound familiar at all?
Very familiar. It sounds like a recipe for chaos.
There you go. What are the red flags?
So, I mean, it's first helpful to get grounded on what are corporations for? What do big companies do? Corporations are one of the greatest inventions in the history of humanity. And I say that in complete seriousness. If you think about before corporations existed, how do we get together as people, as large groups to solve important problems? It was with soldiers on battlefields. It was taking things from other people. Corporations are an incredible innovation on that prior, older form of solving problems.
It is somewhat less, chaotic.
Yeah, it's not perfect, but it's a much preferable system. And if you think about it, a corporation is nothing but a piece of paper that documents promises we all make to each other. And the power of it is such that hundreds of thousands, sometimes, or even millions of people will come together and work and coordinate and collaborate within the construct of that corporation to solve amazing problems. Now, the thing is, each corporation begins as a startup, started by a person who came up with an idea, or a few people who came up with an idea, built a company, and scaled it over time. As companies scale, what they do is they become very, very focused on preserving what they've built, and rightly so. Right. And so everything inside the corporation is optimized for perpetuation of the corporation. And so we make decisions slowly. We do things by committee. We are very deliberate about the choices that we make. And when you're working inside a corporation, it can feel like things are slow and hard. And why is everything so difficult? Why do we have to wait 6 weeks to meet to discuss this? Those are features of the system, not a bug. That helps the corporation be careful. The problem is that when you're trying to do something radical and new, something that might even compete with your existing model, that is very, very hard for a corporation to do. Everything is organized and optimized for efficiency, for profitability, for avoiding mistakes. And innovation at its core, if you're doing something radically different, requires making mistakes. It's inefficient, it's messy, it's chaotic, it's not sterile. Our corporations tend to be pretty sterile by design. And so that's where the tension exists. So when I see this all the time, a CEO might stand up in front of their company and say, we need to act more like a startup. And I can't think of a worse thing to say. Most startups fail. If you're running a big corporation, you don't want to act like a startup. Instead, what you want to do is you want to leverage the things that a corporation is good at, which is scaled execution in a very efficient way. Keep doing that. Do that a little bit better each year. You need to find ways to tap into alternative structures of governance and incentives and talent in order to get access to the innovation that's happening all around you, all around the corporation. And in our model, we go build startups to solve that problem. But there are lots of ways to do it.
Yeah. I guess a couple of related scenarios. For example, I have a friend who kind of went through that story where they had a big town meeting. The executives got up and said, hey, we really want to explore doing different things.
Yeah.
And he came up with an idea that was like to add a new service. It was related to the core business model, but was very much its own different thing. The executives were interested, intrigued, and they said, hey, we want you to get together with our top salesperson and figure out how to make this happen. The problem is that the top salesperson was the top salesperson because he worked 60 to 70 hours a week.
Okay.
Zero bandwidth.
Yeah.
Zero bandwidth. So nothing ever happened.
Yeah, and probably incentivized to keep selling what he was already selling.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, why would you want to change?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like that was working pretty well for him if he was the top salesman, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean that's in a microcosm. That's what happens is companies again are designed to perpetuate what exists. The talent, the incentive systems, the governance, way we make decisions, everything is organized around making things safe and predictable.
So it sounds like most people or a lot of people in business fundamentally misunderstand what meaningful innovation entails.
Yeah.
And I say this fully admitting I couldn't even define it for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's much harder. It's a much harder problem than most people think. I used to work with an amazing gentleman named Clayton Christensen, who's one of the godfathers of corporate innovation. 30 years ago, he wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma that described how young upstart companies enter new markets with inferior products, grab a foothold, eventually move up market and displace incumbents. And over the last 30 years, I was talking with Clay's son about this a few weeks ago. We were out in California surfing together, and we're nerds. We're talking about innovation while we're out in the water.
Well, if you're surfing, you're not a big nerd.
You can be both.
You're a California nerd.
You can be both. But we were talking about how ironic it is that in the last 30 years, everybody in business is aware of the theory of disruptive innovation. We understand it better than ever, and yet we are simultaneously worse at dealing with it than ever before. It's a very, very sticky problem.
Why is that?
If I were to put my finger on one thing, it's that over the last 30, 40 years, we have decided as a society that the primary metric for determining whether a company is successful is return on invested capital. Yeah, this financialization of everything, right? ROIC is not a bad metric, but we've decided that it is the most important metric as a society. And what happens when you are managing a company to optimize your return on invested capital is that you are trying to be as profitable as possible. There's a couple ways to boost your ROIC. You can do that by becoming more profitable. You can also do it by removing capital from the business. In other words, what happens is it's much, much easier to shut down a factory if you want to boost your return on invested capital than it is to go invest in a new business line. And so over time, what we see happening is that companies have become extraordinarily profitable. A few years ago, I just asked the question, how much capital is sitting on the balance sheets of publicly traded U.S. companies? And the number I got back was $7 trillion sitting on corporate balance sheets. Corporations in America are more profitable than they've ever been before. Ironically, at the same time, they're going out of business faster. I looked at some friends of mine do a study every few years. Some former colleagues do a study every few years where they look at the lifespan of companies on the S&P 500. And over the last 30, 40 years, that lifespan has been cut in half. So companies on average are making more money, and they are on average going out of business faster. That's counterintuitive, right?
Super counterintuitive.
But the idea of what's happening is that companies are getting very good at maximizing for profit, not for resilience. That focus on profitability creates extraordinarily fragile companies that are overly optimized for efficiency. And if the world stays static and never changes, they'll do fine. But as we know, the world changes and it's changing faster. And so as the world changes, they're too fragile. Something breaks, the whole system comes crashing down. Right. They don't endure.
So I'll go further back than you did, and name drop Alvin Toffler, is transience. Transience is increasing speed. So you can't stay stable.
Yeah.
Faster things are going out around you.
Yeah. And it's hard for our brains to process what's happening. I like to show there's a great 2-photo comparison from 2005, 2013, changing of the popes in the Vatican. Same location, similar type of event. And there are photos on the internet of the crowds at both of those events. In 2005, you see thousands of people standing there. You will see a glimmer of what's going to come. You see a few people with flip phone screens in the audience recording the event. 8 years later, it looks like every single person in the audience is holding up a smartphone or a tablet to record the event. In 8 years, we completely changed the way that we interact with the world around us. Now, in the moment, it's really hard to perceive it because our brains think in linear changes. We don't think things are changing that fast. We step back and look and realize, wow, this is an exponential curve. And there are exponential growth and change curves all around us right now. Things are changing faster than ever. And so for corporation to say, we're going to avoid making mistakes, we are going to avoid messiness, we're going to make things straightforward, predictable, clean in our company, is just it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the world around them is marching forward and working. They won't endure.
So let me go back 2 questions ago. So if most people fundamentally misunderstand what meaningful innovation is, what is your definition of meaningful innovation?
Something new that has impact. As simple as that. Yeah, a lot of people go back and forth on what the word means. It's almost a word that's so overused that it has no meaning. For me, it's something new that has impact. And you might add a desirable impact in there. As generally we think about innovation, we think about things that do good in the world. So that's how I define it.
Okay, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
Spring is coming, and that means it's time to bring your backyard back to life. At Indie Grills, we design and build custom outdoor living spaces that turn your patio into the best room of the house. From stamped concrete patios to cozy outdoor fireplaces to fully custom outdoor kitchens built for grilling, gathering, and entertaining, we do it all. We handle everything from design to build, and we're known for doing it one way. Built fast, built right, on time, and on budget. So before summer fills up, start now. Visit indiegrills.com and schedule your outdoor living consultation today. Indie Grills. This is where spring begins.
All right, we're back with this week's episode of the IBJ Podcast and my interview with Elliott Parker about the most effective ways for companies to innovate. So pursuant to the title of your book, what is the illusion of innovation?
The illusion of innovation is the idea that corporations spend all kinds of time, money, and attention on activities that feel innovative, that feel like they should be producing some type of business result. But when you look back at the effects, realize that it was a lot of activity and not a lot of impact. And so they fool themselves.
Right.
Yeah, they fool themselves into thinking, the board's asking the CEO, well, what are you doing about AI right now? And so let's get a team going. Let's try some AI experiments. It's done in a way because of the way the corporation is optimized to be careful that doesn't actually create any enduring impact a lot of the time.
I would assume most executives have benign intentions, if I'm using that word correctly.
100%.
Right. They realize that things need to change.
Yeah.
But there's also a cross current that prevents the real change from happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you skinny it down to the basics, back to the idea of return on invested capital is the optimal metric. What happens in a company, let's imagine, and let's go back to the cookware company. Somebody in the company has an idea for some new line of cookware that they'd like to launch. Well, what's going to happen is the marketing team is going to say, I'm not sure about the brand name that you've selected for this thing. The lawyers are going to say, well, the patent landscape's a little bit difficult. I'm not sure we can get patents on it. The finance team's going to say, okay, well, we need a 5-year forecast for how this thing's going to perform. You get where I'm going, right?
Yeah.
And these ideas none of that works when you're doing something new, especially something that hasn't been done before. And so these things don't take off.
What else is the illusion? I love this phrase. It's the catchiest book title of the decade. The illusion of innovation. What does it look like? Just people sitting in a room with whiteboards, writing things down.
A perfect, sad example. I worked once with over the last 20 years, I've probably worked with 60 Fortune 500 companies and their innovation teams and their executives on these types of problems. And I remember one company I worked with that had a 250-person innovation team. The annual budget was $53 million. And they'd been spending that budget for 7 years. And after 7 years, when I met the team, like, well, what has your team produced? That's amazing. I mean, surely there are things all around that we could look at and say, and no, the team had not produced a single dollar of incremental revenue. Their biggest claim was that they had reduced the time on call center calls by a couple of seconds. Now that's important. That's useful. But that's not what the company was investing in the team to do.
Right, which is what I kind of gleaned from the book. If these teams do succeed, it's usually to make the company more efficient, not changing the company. Did I get that right?
Yeah. Yeah, back to return on invested capital, right? Yeah. In the end, what the companies and corporations are good at this, and thankfully so. Efficiency, innovation, performance innovation. So think about, the new model of the Toyota Prius comes out the next year. Like corporations are very good at those incremental improvements. Most of the innovations that we benefit from are efficiency and performance improvements. And so those are fantastic forms of innovation that corporations do well. There's a third type of innovation that Clayton Christensen used to talk about, which he called market creating innovation. And this is enabling people, the small and simple, the weak and simple, he used to call them. Like himself, he would say that anyway. It enables the weak and simple to do things that previously only the powerful could do. Those types of new things require new business models, new technologies. Those types of things tend to be very difficult for corporations to do. They're not set up to do that.
It sounds like we're saying it's almost inherently flawed trying to innovate a company's business model from within. Is it achievable? Is it possible?
It is achievable.
Meaningful change?
Yeah, fortunately, it is achievable. There are plenty of examples of corporations that have gone through business model transformations. Amazon is a good one, right? Now rely mostly on AWS for their profitability. Netflix famously went from DVDs to digital distribution to now production of content. IBM famously went from hardware to services. Those are big business model shifts. The thing I would note is that none of the shifts that we see, those transformations that happen in businesses, as far as I can tell, none of those originated or were driven by an innovation team. They came from the CEO or through an acquisition or some other means, not an innovation team. 30 years into this now, every corporation has set up a big innovation team in hopes that they will produce those kinds of transformations, identify the next new $10 billion revenue opportunity for us. And there aren't any. And that, I think, is worth noting and dealing with honestly. So transformation can happen, but it happens through different avenues.
Yeah. So it sounds like a too many cooks problem.
In part, I think I boil it down to four things. It's a governance problem, the way we make decisions. Inside corporations, it's what Francis Fukuyama called a vitocracy, where it takes a unanimous vote to move forward and do something. Any one person can stop a new idea, right? It's an incentives problem. If you're working inside a big company, you are incentivized to never be wrong. An entrepreneur, it's a very different situation. Entrepreneurs are almost incentivized to be wrong a lot because when they're right, it really makes a difference. So startups are optimized for magnitude of correctness. Corporations are optimized for frequency of correctness. And that difference creates very, very different outcomes.
So if I'm a startup or a small company or even a medium-sized company, I probably am not big enough to have an innovation team.
No.
So these problems don't apply to me really.
Well, you're not optimized for preservation if you're a small company or you're growing startup. You're optimized for figuring out what works. And as a result, you're out running experiments, you're out making mistakes, you're out doing things that seem capital inefficient because you're trying to survive. It's a very different set of incentives.
So what is a strategy that works?
So there are a couple of things. If you're running a large company, I think it's important to recognize what is a corporation good at. So there are certain types of innovation, as we talked about, that a corporation can do extraordinarily well. Corporations are very good at solving what I call execution problems. We know what the problem is. We know what we need to do. We just need to go do it. Corporations will beat startups at those problems every day. Startups, on the other hand, are very good at learning problems. We know what the problem is. We're not sure what the solution is. In fact, it's pretty ambiguous. Startups are going to beat corporations at learning problems every day. And so it begins with understanding what is a corporation good at. Efficiency innovation, product innovation, corporations do that well. When it comes to fundamental business model transformation, I mean, think about it in our own lives, all the memorable new products and services and new businesses that we engage with, most of those have come from startups in the last 30, 40 years, not from large companies. There are exceptions, but most of the time those are coming from startups. And so if you're running a large corporation and trying to figure out how to access business model transformation, my advice is you need to find ways to engage with startups through partnership, acquisition, investment, and also in creating new startups from scratch outside the corporation.
There's a theme, and you brought it up just a second ago about experimentation, the theme that runs through the book. And I've heard you basically boil the book down to the phrase, run more experiments fast, cheap, and weird.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, fast and cheap, I think, are obvious.
Okay.
Right. You want to get answers back quickly. You want to not spend too much money per experiment. in the face of an unknowable future, the best strategy often is to go run as many experiments as you can at the lowest possible cost per experiment. The weird part is what sometimes throws people off. And what I mean by that is your experiments should be designed to challenge what you believe as an organization. In other words, when I go talk to corporate leaders, often they'll say, oh, we run lots of experiments. I'm like, okay, let's look at the experiments you're running. And what we'll find is that those experiments, by and large, are designed to reinforce what the corporation already knows or believes. They're designed to help us feel better about the way that we're doing things, and to be able to look at those startups that are nipping at our heels saying, like, they don't know what they're doing. Because look, our experiments, the best experiments lead to more experiments. They should be designed to challenge the status quo. That feels very uncomfortable to do in a corporation.
So the people doing these experiments, it sounds like it is not very likely that they're going to get much traction if they are functionally working inside of a corporation. They need somehow to be separate.
Yeah. Okay. You ideally, depending on how weird that experiment is, you need some new form of governance and incentives and so on that is optimized for running experiments.
And I'm just throwing stuff out here. It could be a division, a different arm of the company, or it could be a startup.
Yeah, need some distance from the core. What we used to argue. I remember lots of conversations with Clay Christensen on this topic. The idea was that for a corporation to overcome the innovator's dilemma, the solution was to
explain what the innovator's dilemma is.
It's that idea that corporations, as they seek to optimize and perform for their best customers, most profitable customers, increase the feature quality of their products and move up market over time. Think about the remote you have on your TV. It's got 42 buttons on there that you never use. It's optimized every year and becomes more complicated and challenging. That happens all around us. Startups enter the market with something that looks inferior to that big incumbent corporation. Your remote control is a poor example, but your remote control only has 3 buttons, right? Like, that's not good enough. Our best customers demand 42 buttons. And so they look at that and say, that's a terrible idea. That's never going to work. And guess what? The startups find customers who were previously dissatisfied with the status quo and find that this new product is good enough. And they start buying it. That startup then moves up market themselves and over time displaces the large corporation.
It's very rare that I can come up with an example as a consumer for what things that I talk about on the podcast. But we have Roku. At home. And that is a simple controller, and I love it.
There you go.
Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
So good for you guys, Roku. You gave me something that I wanted, and therefore I'm using your product, not using anybody else's product.
There you go. Yeah, once you see the pattern, you see that it's all around us all the time. Yeah. You see these startups come in with good enough products. The example that Clayton Christensen used to use in the book was that he wrote was talking about steel manufacturing. Steel was, 50 years ago, was manufactured in these enormous mills, and then these things called mini mills came onto the market, started marketing and selling rebar, making rebar very inexpensively. And the big steel companies said, rebar, we don't make any money selling rebar. Please take that. You can have that market. We're going to focus on the big rolls of steel that we sell so profitably. Well, guess what the rebar manufacturers figured out how to do over time is they figured out how to make, with all the techniques they were using to make this rebar inexpensively and profitably, they figured out how to do the same with rolls of steel, and they displaced the incumbents. It happens all the time, and it's a very difficult problem to solve. The old solution was set up an innovation team, give them some distance from the core, let them go operate, let them cook, give them a separate office, let them wear jeans to work, whatever, separate budget, new rules. And what we found is that most of the time corporations just don't go far enough. If you want to do things that are really, truly transformative, you need to access that innovation in other ways.
Interesting. Okay.
More distance.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It sounds like a distance problem.
Yeah.
Though it seems like there is a sweet spot. There's the way a startup operates, but it is funded with the resources of the large company.
Yeah,
that's what I got from the book. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's our whole thesis at Alloy is that it's, if you look at startups, we're talking a lot about corporations. Startups have their fair share of problems too, right? Most startups fail. We've somehow become okay with the idea, especially if you work in venture capital, you're investing in startups, that 9 out of 10 companies in your portfolio might go out of business. That's a crazy idea. I think we can do better than that. And so core to our thesis at Alloy is that by pairing up the best of startups with the best of corporations, both have goodness, we can create better outcomes for everybody.
just with all due respect, I don't want people to feel like this is an infomercial for Alloy. So apart from Alloy, what are alternatives?
Yeah. So
that other companies could do?
Yeah, I think about this. Let me give you a quick story to set this up and explain it. Sarah Blakely is an amazing entrepreneur. She started a company called Spanx and became the youngest self-made female billionaire in the country back in 2012. She was named that. She started her company 12 years before that. She was, at the time in the year 2000, she was selling fax machines door to door in Florida, which you can imagine, special kind of person who can do that job.
Yeah.
She had $5,000 in savings, and she had this idea she couldn't get out of her head. She was cutting the feet off her pantyhose and thinking, this is a great product. Surely somebody else has come up with this idea and is making this. I could just buy it. She looked around, couldn't find it. So she thought, maybe I could do this. She started calling hosiery mills in North Carolina. Nobody would return her call. Eventually one did. She started making the product, and she needed a patent on this thing. She couldn't afford a patent attorney, so she went to Barnes & Noble and she bought a book on patent law, wrote her patent application. She didn't know any of the buyers at the department store, so she kind of had to talk her way into these conversations. Famously, she showed up at Neiman Marcus at the reception desk one day, asked for a meeting with the buyer, talked her way into it, and convinced the buyer to go down into the restroom with her, go into a stall and try on the product. This is an amazing individual, right? And she created an incredible outcome for her employees, great product for her customers. Now imagine an alternate universe where Sarah Blakely in the year 2000 is working for a large consumer packaged goods company. She has the same idea. She's on the 4th floor of the company. Her manager says, this is a great idea. Why don't you write up a business plan? They submit the business plan to the innovation team that deliberates, right? The marketing team gets involved, and they do all these meetings about the brand name. The attorneys are like, well, you can't get a patent on this. That's not going to work. The finance team has talked about it and wants the financial forecast. And she submits a request to go meet with the buyers and do the travel. Travel gets denied, on and on. Like that's not, and the idea never goes anywhere. In that imaginary scenario, it's not difficult. Those of us who've worked inside of large companies, that doesn't seem far-fetched. It seems very plausible of a scenario. In both instances, it's the same individual, same idea, just as smart, just as creative, just as passionate. The difference is the circumstances and the incentives. Sarah Blakely, as an entrepreneur, had the autonomy to just go do things. She had the skin in the game. She had the passion. She had all those elements that make entrepreneurs special. And what I argue is that the fundamental unit of innovation, the atomic unit of innovation, is an entrepreneur in a startup, a special kind of person in a special kind of structure. And so if you're in a corporation, you're trying to figure out how do we do more business model innovation and in the end transformation to stay relevant, you have to find ways to access that fundamental atomic unit of innovation. You do it through 4 ways: by investing in startups, by acquiring startups, by partnering with startups, or by building startups from scratch outside the corporation. And somebody can tell me a 5th way. Those are the only 4 that I can think of engaging with that atomic unit.
I think we ran a story. Well, I literally, it feels like we run one of these stories every 2 weeks. Eli Lilly and Company acquires a smaller company. And by smaller, I mean only $1 billion or $2 billion.
Yeah.
And that seems to be their strategy right now.
Yeah.
Though I don't mean any disrespect to the folks who are working in R&D at Lilly.
Yeah.
But when I tried to think of a great example of innovation by acquisition, that would be.
Yeah, and it's a great approach for a lot of companies. Now, each of those 4 things I talked about have tension and pitfalls, right? In M&A and doing these acquisitions, large corporations, it's a powerful tool for bringing in technology, customers, market position instantly into a company. The challenge is, if you think about it, if you accept that premise that an entrepreneur in a startup is a special kind of person in a special structure with those elements like autonomy and skin in the game that make that work so well, the second you buy that and bring that into a corporation, guess what? You start destroying those circumstances that made it so special. The entrepreneur doesn't have autonomy anymore. They have a boss. They don't have skin in the game. They don't have urgency anymore. And so we see M&A fail a lot. The reason is that often that integration happens a little bit too prematurely. And so the trick in getting acquisitions right is to determine, if you're a corporation, is this startup ready to be fully integrated, or do we need to keep this separate for a while and maintain the circumstances that enable that entrepreneur to flourish?
Yeah. And I think something that we mentioned, I think this was related early in the conversation, you could have a CEO, you could have a Jeff Bezos who says, I've got an idea. you guys go over there and do it.
Yeah. And that's a great way, especially when that CEO is the founder of the company and is willing to risk everything and start all over from scratch. It's harder if you are at the helm of a 100-year-old company and you are now the CEO who is better not screw up what you've been handed. It's a very different circumstance.
Well, you think somebody like Jeff who had been through it would be like, I understand if you screw up.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But you need to have that.
Amazon's an amazing example of a very innovative company for that exact reason. That willingness to think over the long term and to run experiments that challenge the status quo.
And I'm trying to make this valuable for somebody who has a 25 to 50 employee business. I guess it's easier for that person to be the Bezos of his kingdom or her kingdom. And, we're just going to do this now.
Yeah. The key lesson still applies. A company, no matter the size, needs to be running more experiments. Tell me how many experiments you're running, what nature. I will tell you, you probably need to be doing more.
Okay. So I own, God help me, an ice cream shop. Really popular ice cream shop.
That's my retirement dream.
Yes. I need somebody running experiments. I need to have some people running experiments.
Yeah.
And challenge the idea of what we're doing here.
Yeah. You do. And those experiments might be in the form of new product ideas. Those might be in the form of new efficiency ideas, right? To save money. Companies likely going to be doing that already and doing that quite well. But it might also be in the category of entirely new business models, ways of getting ice cream in the hands of new customers or the same customers, but in different ways. There ought to be some room for experimentation there too. And that depends. It depends on your objectives as a company leader, where you want that company to go. The question is you always need to start with is how much innovation do we need and how soon do we need it? If you've got an ice cream shop on the corner in your town, you might win forever just through geographic domination, right? You are the one ice cream shop in town and you're good. And that might be good enough. You don't need to expand to another town. Great. You probably need to be running experiments around efficiency, and you probably need to be coming up with new flavors and new ways to make the experience exciting for the customers who come by, but you probably don't need a lot of business model experimentation.
So let's go back, though you already did at one point. Go back to my cookware company. How can I best put my company in the position to develop true innovation?
So a couple of rules to set up first. I said earlier, one of the biggest problems CEOs run into is they say that we should act more like a startup, or another way of saying that is innovation is everybody's job. No, it's not.
I don't want it to be my job.
No, you want some people focused heads down on running the business. You don't want them distracted. And so the first thing I usually recommend to companies is first align on a definition. What is innovation? What are we trying to achieve? Why do we need innovation? How much of it do we need? How soon do we need it? And then what are the different types of innovation that are important to us? Because each of those types of innovation should have different pathways for achieving it. And so you might say we run innovation that's close to our core, some that's adjacent to our business, some that's transformative, or Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3, or efficiency, product, et cetera. It doesn't matter as long as you have a shared understanding of the language. Now, when I'm sitting across the table from other executives in the company that I work with, we know that we're talking about the same thing when we're saying innovation. And we know that we have a shared understanding of the pathway for that particular type of innovation that we've all agreed to. That alone is probably the highest kind of bang for the buck change that companies can make to better understand how to be more effective at innovation.
Okay. I'm going to take us up to the present day. Your book, Illusion of Innovation, was published in 2024. So that was toward the beginning of the generative AI explosion. Yep. So in the last 2 years, not just generative AI, but AI in general has been hailed as the defining technological advance of this generation. How does that advancement in AI affect what you have written? Or if you could go back and either rewrite the book or write a really meaty prologue to the book, what would it say?
Yeah, I think it's a carrying out of the trends that I noted in the book at an exponential level. And a few of those trends, for example, one is the trend around the destruction of what we call transaction costs. I'll get nerdy here for a second, but 100 years ago, an economist named Ronald Coase won a Nobel Prize in economics for explaining why companies exist. He said in a perfectly efficient market, there would be no companies. We'd all be individual actors. We'd come together, solve problems, and disperse. no friction, right? Companies exist, he said, because there are transaction costs in the open market. And if you can build a corporation, you can manage those transaction costs inside the corporation at a lower cost than you can get in the open market. Transaction costs meaning negotiating prices, finding people with the right skills, accessing knowledge. Now, 100 years ago, when he won the Nobel Prize, transaction costs in the open market were very high. There was a way to think about why corporations exist and what they should do and how they should optimize. In 2026, technology and artificial intelligence in particular are destroying transaction costs. What I mean by that is it's so much easier to access knowledge than it was even a few years ago. It's so much easier to find people with the right skills. It's so much easier to negotiate prices and these things. Transaction costs are lower. We should expect the nature of companies to change if Ronald Coase was right, and I think he was. And there's three big changes I think are happening right now in companies. Number one, companies, corporations of all sizes, but especially large companies, need to get much better at coordinating outside assets than they are at controlling assets internally. So working with partners, working with outside fractional helpers, back that Coasean kind of frictionless economy, we're headed there. So how do you get good at engaging with startups? Number two, companies, we should expect them to get smaller in terms of number of people. And we are seeing that. The trend over time on average company size is going down. In fact, it's going down in a pretty straight line. And at some point, if you carry that line out, guess what? The number hits one person per company, even zero, right? This idea that maybe companies become computers in the future, if you draw it out. We're not sure where the limit of that line is. And then number three change that we see happening in companies right now is that companies are becoming more like brains than machines. What I mean by that is 100 years ago, the mental model for a corporation was that it was like a machine or a factory. You turn the dials to affect the quality and the quantity of the output of that machine. Now, I think the proper mental model is a corporation should be thought of as a brain, a collector of knowledge, where the employees involved in that corporation can query the brain to get the information they need to act more autonomously. This means companies with less hierarchy, more autonomous teams and individuals. It's a totally different way of thinking about how to organize a company. So if I were to look back over the last couple of years, we've seen those changes happen in the companies we build. In our own company, we are trying to stay ahead of that curve and making sure that we are prepared for the future. Things are going to get very, very weird very quickly.
Oh God. Yeah, I would assume, now any responsible executive is thinking about innovation, they're essentially thinking, how do I incorporate AI?
Yeah.
Is that something that you're also seeing on your side, where companies are coming to you and saying, we don't know what to do with this exactly?
Yeah.
And we've played around with it internally, but we're not really sure where we're going.
Yeah, a lot of it fits into that category of things I'd call the illusion of innovation, right? Where it's we've got Copilot, we're using that in the company. I was talking to an executive last week at a company who said, if you listen to our C-suite out in the world, when they talk about our business, they say we are AI first, AI everything. Everything they talk about is AI this, AI that. And then he said, this is a guy who leads innovation inside this company. He said, my IT guy won't let me use any of the AI tools. So he said, I feel like I'm operating in this gray zone where I'm either going to be the hero or I'm going to get fired. And I'm not sure which. And I think a lot of people can relate to that right now. It just feels uncertain. It's hard to navigate.
So that is what you're seeing. For the most part, companies coming to you, at least in part, saying, we need to make AI work for us.
Yeah. And it's, I think, again, companies are optimized to be safe and to preserve. And so they move deliberately and slowly, and that is by design. But in our startups, what we see, for example, we've got a venture studio we run here in town where we've got a single individual who is currently incubating 12 companies at once with 1,000+ AI agents that he's built. Each of those companies has an org chart, job descriptions filled by agents that are producing work, a CEO at the top of each one they're checking each other's work, the CEO is making decisions, and then teeing that up for our studio leader to give them further instruction.
They're all doing that independently.
Yeah, it sounds like science fiction, and it sounds like surely that can't be effective, or it can't be.
So that's your example. I mean, you just gave it. They one human
12 companies at once.
12 companies.
Early stages. Now, at a certain point, those companies need to be handed over to more people. It doesn't scale all the way to, producing product and sitting in a room and selling something to somebody. But a lot of the initial work, the validation, can be done. What used to take us months, we can do in a day or two. And that's important, but so is the ability to prioritize our time and energy and to quickly get to the truth, get to answers about what's going to work and what's not, so much faster.
Now, I think on the street level, by that I mean my level, the gutter level, a lot of people see, if they understand AI at all, they understand it as generative AI.
Yeah.
I know there's much more and elements of it with much, much greater impact. Than simply, finding something to do some tasks for me.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about those?
100%.
What am I missing?
Yeah. Here's what we've been learning. This is, I think, should all give us some comfort, but the individual in the loop matters more than ever. That system, for example, the studio we run, depends on Ben, the studio leader, starting the process with very good business ideas. The large language models are not good at coming up with doing that ideation work. They're good at regurgitating known knowledge right now. They're not good at coming up with new ideas. They're good at repackaging information, not generating new information. And so the person in that process and their creativity and their judgment matters more than ever, actually. And that's really important to keep in mind. There's this idea called the automation paradox, which I find fascinating. We saw this in the Industrial Revolution. As factories became more automated, what happened was the individuals involved in the operation of those factories became more critical because all of the problems we had seen before were designed to be solved in the automation. So now when problems do happen, they're very weird and unexpected and very difficult and hard to solve. And they can only be solved by the person in the loop. The paradox is both that idea that the person becomes more important, but also that they become less capable because they haven't dealt with all the little problems along the way. How do you get the people training? That's an idea that we're thinking a lot about. I'm thinking a lot about in how I run my company. How do you help people develop the judgment they're going to need to be able to work with AI? It's a hard problem.
I'm going to go back a couple of steps, just make sure I'm thinking about this right. Like use Copilot, for example, or Claude. Or somebody.
Yeah.
So you probably have a bunch of CEOs or executives out there that think that is innovation, but you just referred to it as the illusion of innovation. What is real AI innovation?
Yeah, it's using it to get actual work done right now. Yeah. And sure, there are a lot of low-level tasks that AI can do to make more efficient. If you ask a lot of people, though, I think a lot of people inside of big companies especially will look at what AI is doing, the output. They feel like it's actually creating more work for them, not less, ironically. Now, my job might have been in the past, I was creating PowerPoint slides. Now I feel like I'm editing PowerPoint slides, and I have more of them to deal with than I did before. So it's a little...
From broadcast to podcast, Inside Indiana Business with Gary Dick is now available anytime on YouTube or in your podcast feed. Subscribe and listen wherever you get your podcast or at ibjpodcast.com.
The IBJ Media Podcast Network is the soundtrack of a growing state. Indiana is on the move, and you can hear it happening on the IBJ Media Podcast Network. We bring you the voices at the center of our economy, our courts, our companies, and our communities. Subscribe now and be part of the conversation that's building Indiana's future. Find all of our shows by searching IBJ Media in your podcast app or visit ibjpodcasts.com.
It's a little bit ironic and a little bit different than we think. In some ways, you have to ask the question. Back in the early days of computers, there was a big debate as to whether computers actually produced efficiency gains to the companies that use them or not. We're going through a similar debate right now with AI and its use. And you're asking the right question, which is, well, what do you mean by use of AI? How are you using it? And I think it's important for companies to understand there are different ways to use it.
Are really transformative uses of AI, not just for greater efficiency.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, to transform a model, or what have you. And this is the edge of the diving board for me. This is all I can think of to ask.
Yeah. For example, AI is fantastic at solving coordination problems that are really hard to solve. And now, if you buy the premise that corporations need to get better at coordinating across assets, resources that exist outside the corporation, AI can be a very powerful tool for doing that. That's a little bit high level and theoretical, but there are plenty. You go into any company, you'll see examples of that the AI could be applied to do. AI is not great yet right now at generating new data or like fresh ideas, information.
Mm-hmm.
It's good at repackaging and telling us things. It's good at telling us what we already believe too.
Yeah.
And not necessarily challenging the status quo. So there's danger in that too.
Okay.
Especially inside of big companies where you're optimized to lean into the things that we already believe.
Okay. At great risk to my random access memory, is there anything that of great importance that we haven't covered?
No, I'd go back to the big advice in all this: more experiments, fast, cheap, and weird. The future is things are changing so fast. There's a great a quote from a well-known futurist whose name escapes me at the moment, but he said the reason why technology progresses, or he predicted the rate of change of progress increases because people have access to technologies and information and ideas that they didn't before. So as the number of people in the network increases and their ability to share ideas and the number of quality of those ideas increases, you should expect not just the amount of progress to change, but the rate of change to increase. We're talking about curves, not straight lines. We're living in a world where I can pick up my phone and have a FaceTime call with anybody in the world pretty much for free. We have access to all the ideas that anyone has ever come up with. And so what happens in a world when we're all connected, we all have access to the ideas, all the knowledge of the world? The answer is we don't know. We've never been through this before. What we should expect, however, is that the rate of change of progress will increase pretty dramatically.
Okay.
But I'm an optimist about that. And I think we have a moral duty to be optimistic, actually. We have a moral duty for those who have not been born yet. We have a moral duty to be good ancestors. And what I mean when I say optimistic is it's not that the future is going to be rosy from here on out, that there won't be problems. Problems are inevitable. There will be problems. There will be problems that we can't even imagine how complicated and difficult they are. When I say I'm optimistic, I mean that I believe our capacity to address those problems will continue to increase. We'll get better at dealing with problems.
Okay. All right. I'll hang my hat on that one. Wow. Well, thank you so much. This is super eye-opening and a great start for our next innovation issue.
Great. This is fun. Thank you.
My thanks again to Elliott Parker. And folks, before you get on with the rest of your week, there are several stories in this week's innovation issue I want to draw to your attention. As I mentioned earlier, IBJ's string of annual innovation issues kicked off in 2015. And since then, we've taken deep dives into AI, blockchain, drones, disruption, advanced manufacturing, nuclear energy, groundbreaking medicines, and the way we now pair food with technology. For this year's issue, we're taking a look back to get updates on the people and startups we featured and whether predictions of how these technologies and companies would affect us actually panned out. For example, Daniel Bradley explores how the coding industry, once considered a safe haven for job seekers, is adjusting to AI's ability to code on its own. Susan Orr reports that many banks are exploring blockchain's potential, but few are using it. And Mickey Shuey gauges the impact of the CHIPS Act for producing semiconductors. And again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at ibj.com. And I will say it is quite a bit easier to access all the latest business news and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business community and economy if you're a subscriber. We're running a promotion right now that gives you complete access for $1 per week for 3 months. Just to get a sense of how valuable and original our content is, just go to ibj.com and click on the subscribe button. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.